SaaS era do more damage to human creativity than in like our natural capabilities of being creative and builders? Because it's essentially got us all in, I'll speak to our industry, of like set it and forget it. There's these hard, fast rules. And when you say, hey, that, now building these loops and, automations and AI, no matter what you do, there's this frustration that something can change and break. But where my mind goes is like, that's like 99% of life.
Yeah.
And so did SaaS really get us set up for like failure?
I think SaaS, if you're unwilling to change, then yes. And I think part of what, like, just think about software. What is software very good at? It's when there's a known workflow or pattern that is repeatable and doesn't change, a business will find success using software. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of industries, including the one I invest in, where the world's built off exceptions and abnormal events happening.
Yeah.
And they've historically also been very poor adopters of SaaS.
Yeah.
So kind of bring that back to people, I think venture, yes, perhaps, especially if there's an unwillingness to change, because venture, or even like stepping back, investing is something where the incentives are not built around you changing something that your backers or your LPs believes has worked in a prior fund.
Yeah.
You almost keep your strategy the same, the types of companies that you invest in the same. You might maybe on the margin innovate around how you do your work. And that kind of limited the creativity and the bounds of creativity. Think about venture firms. Can you think of one where like they say creativity is one of our values? We have it.
If it is on it, I don't, it's probably people that I don't believe because their website looks exactly like everyone else's.
Like someone else's.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a bit of that, and I think it's incentives, SaaS, being an investor in SaaS, and also probably just the personalities that VC draws may not historically have been creatively maximized. Does that make sense? Like software engineering, probably not historically a occupation you would say creative people go to.
That's true.
But now with AI, like AI allows you to be more creative and imaginative. And in order to actually find like a breakthrough, sometimes you need to help. You need to co-opt with an agent to unlock your creativity.
Yeah.
But you can't do that if you're not default having a creative bone in your body.
Yeah, I was being a little
Facetious about it.
facetious, but I wanted to push on it on how has SaaS impacted us. But I think if you look at SaaS era, the goal was efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And now AI, I think, comes in with this idea of productivity, but also I think pushing boundaries, right? And it's causing a lot of tension. The reason this is like so important right now is because I was speaking with an LP for my other podcast, and they were saying that every pitch that they were getting, or even kind of quarterly update from a GP, everybody mentions their AI strategy. Everybody. And this LP spoke about their desire to kind of really uncover what was the so what of having an AI strategy. And if it actually aligned with what they felt that GP's advantage was, or how they fit within their book. And so it had me thinking about how novel tools started out, or novel approaches in our industry have started out as really something as a key advantage, but then quickly becomes table stakes. And then so like, how does that impact the once advantage, or someone who's coming in maybe a little bit later? How do they continue to enhance their advantage? And we've seen it from, some firms focusing on data, to some firms focusing on providing platform services, to some firms, just specializing in specific industries. How do you see this kind of like movement with AI?
So it's interesting you say that because I found data somewhere that 85% of private market investors now report that they're using AI.
Yeah.
So I mean it's table stakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You cannot not do it, which I think is a net positive thing for productivity.
Yeah.
But kind of reflecting on what you just said is interesting, right? Because you said data platform as the next kind of driver of advantaged or perceived differentiation, vertical specialization, such as Dynamo or John Gleason at Success Venture Partners. That could be defined a few ways. But I think what's interesting is there's always been in those prior cycles roughly a 1 to 2 fund cycle commoditization of that
Yeah.
novelty,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whether it's data, and then probably within 5 to 6 years, most people kind of like, oh, we have access to data, or we can help you with that. And then similarly to platform, although platform does require, and it might have been more a Series A and later thing, that you needed an AUM base in order to kind of pay for all of that. Um, Vertical specialization, probably something that more sat in the earlier rungs of venture because AUM plays a role in helping you have a defensible portfolio strategy against a vertical. It's harder to do that as you have more AUM. But I think what AI is doing, and I think there's a bit of irony here, right? Because on one side of the equation, we're investing in AI,
Mm-hmm.
and we see it commoditize and remove defensibility or the notion of defensibility in the industries it is being adopted in and against the competitive base or the legacy competitive base of software services. So I think actually it's going to accelerate potentially this 1 to 2 fund cycle commoditization of a novel concept. And let's kind of go back, right? We're sitting here 2026, 3 years ago, 2023. I mean, that has arguably happened already in one fund cycle.
Yeah. It has.
So it's already here, and I guess the question I now think about and I rumble on about time to time inside of Dynamo is so what does make us unique? If we're all using the same AI, we're using one of like 3 vendors. What makes us unique? Um, and maybe some of that is if you don't have anything unique and advantaged without AI in the equation, AI isn't going to naturally bring that to you.
At all, at all. And I think this is something that LPs are discovering, right? When they're seeing the same things or the same approaches. Yeah, you're using it for email, you're using it for, writing your VC's book reports, which are essentially our investment memos, for, sourcing, for kind of having multiple touch points with different founders at all times. But I think something that needs to change is like that everyone can do that right now. And everybody has to do that. You really can't rely on just inbound anymore for your deal flow. But my approach is, and that my opinion has been that there are a couple of things that you need to have change management within your organization to really suss out what your advantages should be. And so I think one is you have to be extremely self-aware as an individual investor and your firm of like, what are your strengths? I think tools need to be utilized, whether it's AI or anything else, to enhance your strengths. So if you're really strong at something, the tools that you're using, especially with AI, should be able to magnify them by 10, 100x. The other piece that's important is you have to have a mentality of tinkering. And that's very different from when we were starting out in this industry of like, here are the hard and fast rules of seed investing, Santosh. Here are the hard and fast rules of Series A enterprise software investing, Earnest. And so how can you figure out, one, what are the most important workflows for you? Two, have some type of process where you're constantly in a balanced way without boiling the ocean, seeing what's good out there as a tool and what's not, But also, even if it's good and works for you, Santosh, doesn't mean it works for me.
That's
And
right.
it means it goes back to like, what are you really great at? And you have to have people who are willing to tinker with that in a way that, again, pushes to the so what, right?
Yeah.
And so I think those two things are important. And it made me think of like an analogy of, and I always like to bring in sports, but when all the nerds from Sloan Conference came into basketball and let us know, us idiots know, that 3 points is better than 2 points, right? And so if you shoot 35%, it's better than 50% to twos,
Yeah.
35% of threes. And so everyone's just shooting a lot of threes and layups and free throws. And so that quickly becomes table stake. So what uh, what differentiates champions from people who are mediocre and barely make the playoffs? It's the talent and the expertise. And so for Golden State Warriors, this really puts you in a good place if you have legendary 3-point scorers like Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, and also have a interchangeable defensive player like Draymond Green who can deal with the pace and space, right? And so taking that analogy to venture is like, all right, here's the tool, but what is your skill set that's going to differentiate you and that's going to be leverage that tool in this current
Yeah.
era?
The one thing that I stop, reflect on, and we're a small team. We have one principal, and Malon's been awesome. But I think about a year ago, I stopped and we were on the road and we're just kind of thinking about industry. How does one develop in the industry? And I stopped and asked her, I said, like, what do you think your superpower is? And if you look at a firm, you want to idealistically bring people who have different superpowers together and
Yeah.
your team
Yeah.
is formidable. That's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
I would actually argue that most funds probably have people who have duplicative superpowers, and they've done okay, and we could kind of visit that at some point. But I do agree. Like, what is one superpower? A superpower could be as simple as, hey, they're like just technically very astute, or they're an amazing product person. To where like design, there's I don't know if you remember early 2010s, there were a few amazing people who had design backgrounds or product backgrounds. Like GV was originally seeded with these types of people out of Google itself. What is it that is your superpower? And it could equally be, rather than being functional, it might be someone who has just an amazing EQ, who can
Yeah.
have hard conversations and get tagged in where there might be a challenging situation or a challenging set of personalities. And if you constitute that in the right way, that could be viewed as differentiating and hard to replicate, durable as well in the eye of an LP. But I think going back to your earlier statement, it's not going to be differentiating or durable through a cycle. If, like you're showing, I'm saying we do AI, we have platform, like depending on where you sit in the venture pecking order, that's going to be table stakes
Yeah.
for you. But also kind of going to your point on strengths, like don't use AI to help you improve a weakness. That might be better done by actually adding to your team
Absolutely.
in a certain way. Is the one thing I also think about when we think about AI is, I think one of the more important artifacts inside of a firm that'll emerge is the skills file that you're creating and all of the accompanying references that that skill has to go tap into. And that's what, like, we spend time once a year revisiting. Because you're right, like our book reports, our LP letters, our book reports. Let's take that. We have an agent that'll go through all of the notes, all the context that we know about a company, and we basically have documented, like we're training a new employee, a skill file that says this is how we think about teams. And there are these 5 traits. It's not that we need every team we invest in to be maxed out. It's an awareness of where do they spike. And based on what we believe about this company and the market they're in, is this the trait they should be spiking on to be successful?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you don't think like that, if you don't believe in kind of the skills MD file actually representing kind of in the AI world your advantage, it's going to be very hard, I think, because everything else, like access, is probably the other thing LPs talk about. I think access is one of those things. It's very hard to show in data,
Yeah.
perhaps, that you're better than the next fund over. But it feels like one of the few elements of venture that still continues to be the differentiator.
Yeah.
Fair, maybe unfair, but like that's the thing I don't think AI is going to crack is access. That's a relationship thing, right?
Yeah. It's yeah. I don't think access is really going to ever. We're starting to see it be challenged with these AI only venture agents or groups like a Boardy or something like that,
Yeah.
that's trying to connect a lot of different people who have never been connected. And you can talk to different people about that type of solution, and they've had mixed results and typically not great results at all. Because I think what is missed, even if you provide somebody in one conversation of like, hey, this is what I'm looking for, it's taste and someone's specific type of taste and what they're looking for. And so,
Could you teach AI taste, do you think? I've experimented with this notion.
man, that's a really good question. I never like to say with technology, no, never, because you probably could be surprised. But today, no. And I think that's where you can't outsource your taste right now in the market, because I think if you balance bringing in these tools of being able to take on more context, more of your insights, give you more room to meet with more founders, more people, theoretically you should be able to it's like I was reading some book about a famous chess master. And when people were bringing in computers, there was a lot of controversy of these centaurs, I believe, centaurs. And that's what you should try to be as an investor. It's like, how do I bring this machine to help me so we can be like the strongest entity ever? So for the human, it needs to be the taste. It needs to be the feel. It should be the hard asking questions. Because I think, and you shared this in our kind of pre-read, the McKinsey stat, if you could share that with the audience.
Yeah. So McKinsey did some analysis around deep research against expert interviews across 10 different industries. So there's a good sample here. Gen AI showed a more optimistic, happy talk bias. I think this is what you're talking about, right? In 7 of the 10. And roughly 40% of the important data points uncovered in expert interviews were just absent. Which is scary, right? Because think about how it's just common practice to go say, oh, here's this dense report Earnest has sent me. I'm going to throw it at Claude. And Claude, give me a 1-page summary.
Yeah.
And you may not be getting everything that you really need unless you've taken the time to make sure Claude has the context you care about.
Yeah.
And you revisit it, to your earlier point, on a frequent enough basis to make sure it's reflective of how you're growing, how you think about the world in your brain and the frameworks you're adopting and retiring.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah. It's a weird time because we're just in this transitionary period, right? Where an example could be like reaching out to a contact and it feeling a little bit like somebody's like, did you have AI write this? I don't have that as much. Given I've always wrote pretty formal emails.
Yes, you do.
And so as people are just, now if they see an M dash, they'll be like, but we're in this transitionary period where it's like, all right, there's going to be a little bit of rocky of like how much we use AI, how much is us. And I think of like when I was in college and people said, when I started college, people said, don't use Wikipedia. And by the time I finished college, they were like, it's a source. Don't worry about it.
It's credible.
It's credible. And so you just kind of, you want to be able to build and take advantage of the transitionary period and not wait until it's already credible, because you could have missed out on opportunities of reaching out. Because like, what is the unit that's most important for me as a venture capitalist? Is it that somebody says, hey, you fully wrote this email? Or is it, hey, Ernest, let's meet and have this call?
Yeah, right.
That's more important to be able to
conversion.
get the context. But I think, again, bringing back this builder mindset and being able to tinker is like, all right, which workflows do we use it for? How much do we bring in? How much do I need to check? And where should I check? And so I'm seeing it even in kind of the AI note takers of like making sure, hey, if I have, that's why they have the scratch pad there on Fathom or Granola, whatever you use, or if there's another out there, let me and Santosh try for free. But essentially giving you the say, hey, this is really important. Make sure that this is in the notes because a lot of times it could be missed.
Well, I think to your point around constantly tinkering, having the curiosity to grow yourself, right? There's more than ever, I think as an investor, you have to be willing to constantly learn, evolve, change how you think about the world, but also how you actually execute in the world. And for the last couple of years, there's been this obsession around like, how do you prompt and engineer prompts? And what I just pulled up, and we could even include it in the show notes, is there's now kind of the concept of the loop because people have seen what software engineers have been doing over the last 9 to 12 months. And how do we adopt that for work, which is set the goal, discover what you need in order to achieve the goal, plan how you might actually accomplish it, execute, have a check, and then iterate on it till you get to your goal.
Yeah.
And that ultimately, I think, is important. One, because it demonstrates like how quickly you need to change as a venture firm. But two, it kind of gets to the point of what you're saying is to, you need to keep your eye on the prize. And what is ultimately the prize? Like our friend Eric Sipple, I remember when the first time I met him, he goes, listen, I distill venture as a business down to sourcing, selection, stewardship.
Yeah.
And that you can unbundle into a few other work streams,
Yeah.
but that's why we are all here.
Yeah.
And some of us are more advantaged in certain vectors in order to push on sourcing. We may not be great at stewardship, so we need to be cognizant. Do we bring a syndicate partner in to help with stewardship? Selection, I mean, if you're not good at selection, at some point, you're not going to stay in business. But one would argue that that is second to sourcing well and having access.
Yeah. How have you felt for about like I think one narrative when AI was really starting to roll in 2020, when ChatGPT was officially out, public launch, there was this thought for both large business or tech companies as well as thinking about our industry and venture that you could do more with way less people. So there's this idea of like, oh, we're going to have $1 billion company, which now in today's times seems like, oh, you're not dreaming high enough. But anyway, you have $1 billion company with only one person there or two people there. And how for venture, we've had organizations like, VC Lab, Decile Group, share like, hey, now with all these tools, you can be a solo GP and run like a 10-person fund. As a GP yourself, not a solo GP, but a kind of a small but mighty team. How do you feel about that narrative?
Part of the way I think about AI and where I think it is table stakes is all of the work that is repetitive. Not to say it's not important, but it's repetitive. You need to do. It's like you cannot go without it. LP reporting, for example, you have to figure out how you can set up a system where you spend less time actually doing the assembly and the lower value parts of that. So for example, whenever we do a quarterly report, we do an LP letter, we usually do some type of very deep industry thesis that has emerged that quarter or a survey of something that's specific to our domain. Mm-hmm. And then we do like the traditional, slides. Here's the portfolio update, headline numbers, news.
Yeah.
That, by and large, gets written by AI because I've been able to create an environment where our agents have all the context it needs, and it gives me a draft. And we go through, multiple people on my team go through and comb through that in order to make sure it is accurate and exhaustive and inclusive of everything that's important. But that allows us to go spend time on that kind of thinking piece that we
Yeah.
take most of the quarter actually bringing together. And at any given point, before we even decide to write it, there's probably 3 or 4 things that we actually invalidate and say, hey, we don't know if we want to spend our time as a group to do that. Why don't you go take the core and do that on your own? And you can come back and maybe next quarter it bubbles up where we share that with our LPs because it's more baked. So when I think about the solo GP, I think there's a similar, like that's the table stakes. If it's overhead, you need to figure out how to get yourself out of it. It is not differentiating. It's not going to make you a better firm or investor. For those things that you can lean into your advantage on, it's either a time function. How can you lean into your advantage because you avail so much more time in your Google Calendar? Or 2, is there a thoughtful way to use AI to make your advantage even better? And maybe it's better, faster, or deeper.
Yeah.
Depending on what your advantage is. And yeah, like, is there a benefit to solo GPs? Sure. But you still, I think, are going to have to answer the question. Maybe you don't ever want a GP, a fellow GP or a partner, but you need to determine and still answer the, what do I need on my team to be able to win on a, durable, enduring basis? And I think that comes back to some of what we've said before, like, how do you bring someone who has a different type of superpower to you, but is still relevant for you to win? I think the one thing I tell all my solo GP friends is I'm not sure how you do it because it would feel lonely, and sometimes you can get in your own head,
Yeah.
positively or negatively, and it's nice to have that outlet.
Yeah.
And I think different solo GPs over the years have found different ways to manage that. But I personally love at least having kind of one other person I need to speak to before we go commit to doing an investment or even working with a portfolio company that might be in a dire situation and needs more than one head at the table.
Counter, what if that other person is an AI?
Is an AI. I don't think the other person should be AI. Is the question, are they AI or are they not AI?
I'm saying counter, what if I can get that other entity or
as AI
to challenge me in.
I think you raised the point about taste, and there's also like a lot of VC is EQ. I think the stage I'm at, it becomes more quantitative as you go late stage. But I'd argue actually probably the best investors even late stage and company builders. What do they say? Culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yeah.
It's still about kind of the humanistic qualities, and maybe going back to quote you, never say never. But for the foreseeable future, I don't think AI demonstrates those soft skills that one needs. If it's analytical, totally. I think a lot of people now access to information, access to knowledge and information and intelligence, that is kind of going up. Access is going up, and therefore the value of it is slowly creeping down, especially intelligence, because you can offload that.
Yeah.
It's all the other humanistic things that you write a lot about as well.
Expertise,
relationships,
people actually returning your calls, like all those things.
Isn't it weird? We're kind of devolved back to what our parents were like teaching us when we were like 8, 9, 10 years old. Just be a good dude.
Be a good person. It's an advantage.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
Hi there, I'm Leah Slothberg, and I work on the venture relations team at AngelList. AngelList builds modern software paired with premium services to help firms of all sizes launch new investment vehicles and streamline their fund operations, from first-time emerging managers to institutional multi-fund firms. Today, we're sitting down with Sarah Smith. Sarah is the founder and managing partner of the Sarah Smith Fund. Before launching her own firm, she spent 4 years at Bain Capital Ventures and worked as an operator at companies like Meta and Quora. Since launching her rolling fund in 2022, she has since closed a $16 million Fund 1, and in her career has invested nearly $100 million into over 100 companies and is a personal LP in 15 venture funds. She is originally from outside Milwaukee and is an alumni of University of Wisconsin and Stanford GSB. We're going to dig into her journey from Bain to deciding to go solo, what that transition looked like, how she thought about fund structure as she was building, and what it actually takes to show up credibly to institutional LPs as a solo GP. Sarah, You spent 4 years at Bain Capital Ventures before going solo. What was the moment you knew it was time to do this on your own?
Yeah, it's really hard to leave a storied and wonderful firm like BCV. So I don't think it was necessarily one particular moment, but really the culmination of a few things I saw during my last year or two there. To put it in context, I was there sort of during the peak ZIRP period. And at that time, I felt that the math for a $1 billion fund worked best if we had high ownership. And for me, that felt at the time, most of my investments were done at pre-seed and seed. It just so happens that I also figured out fairly quickly that that is the stage that I love the most. I love ambiguity of that stage, the ambition of that stage. But if you're a managing director in a $1 billion fund and you look at the math, you do really need to likely invest something like $50 to $100 million a year on average on an ongoing basis. And I think it's pretty hard to do that at a high quality level with just pre-seed and seed. So that was one sort of thought in my mind. And the other, I'd say, is that there's just a lot of data that shows conviction-led investing at pre-seed and seed is the best way to maximize returns versus more of a consensus-driven approach. And I think it's harder for larger firms sometimes to deploy that kind of decision-making framework. So I felt pretty strongly that to do pre-seed and seed investing, I needed to be in a conviction-led environment. And obviously, there's no more ultimate conviction-led environment than being a solo GP. But lastly, I was also running the fund of funds. So I was able to invest in roughly 40 emerging managers in a few years and worked very closely with many of them and saw how they were operating and running their firms and building their own value proposition for founders. And I just really fell in love with the way that they were working and the way I wanted to show up for my founders. So it was a really hard decision. I love the team at BCV and I'm very proud to have them as an LP in my fund and still partner with them today. But ultimately, it became clear to me that being solo was the right decision for me as an investor.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can understand it being like a series of data points collected over a couple of years that led you to the next stage in your own career. So you started a rolling fund with us with AngelList in 2022 before transitioning to a more traditional fund one. Can you walk us through that decision? What did the rolling fund give you, and when did you know it was time to move on to a more traditional setup?
Yeah, I had been an early LP running the fund of funds at BCV. I had invested in a number of rolling funds like Allison Pickens, for example, with New Normal Fund. And there were a number of attributes I really liked about the model. In fact, I was so bullish, I thought that might be the long-term approach for all solo funds. There's a few things that I think are really great about rolling funds. First, it's very easy to get started. So when you are spinning out of a fund or starting brand new, it can be pretty daunting to think about what you may need to raise to get started to begin investing and deploying your strategy. With a rolling fund, you can actually start your very first quarter, within 3 months, you can be making your first investment. So for people who have a very active deal flow, large top of funnel that don't want to turn that off, a rolling fund is a great option to get going and to prove out your strategy with a few quarters or maybe even longer as almost like a concept fund. So for me, that was very appealing to be able to get going immediately and start writing investments, even with just a few LPs. The second thing I really like the idea of a rolling fund is that you're never only fundraising and you're never only investing. So it helps smooth out the sort of seasonality of fundraising. Mm-hmm. And I really liked that opportunity to opportunistically meet a great LP and be able to bring them into the fund right away versus having, now the traditional fund, I have to wait sometimes a couple of years to bring someone in who might be interested. So it allows you to opportunistically bring in LPs at any time, and it allows a very flexible structure in that way. So there were a lot of attributes to the rolling fund that I really liked, but those kind of timeliness and opportunistic nature, the key reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, was there a point within, what was the point or what were the factors that led you to move from the rolling fund structure over to the more traditional structure?
Yeah, honestly, I would have loved to continue with the rolling fund forever. There's a lot I like about it. At the same time, there are logistically a few challenges with the model. One, it's pretty cost prohibitive, at least as of today. AI might change this, but most LPs of any scale do require audited financials. And with a rolling fund structure, because it is a series of quarterly funds, you would actually have to perform an audit on every single quarter fund. So if you imagine a typical fund is over 3 years, you're basically doing 12 audits in the same amount of time you would do one audit for a traditional fund. And that's just cost prohibitive. So I really reached sort of a point where I had enough LP interest from those that required audited financials that a rolling fund structure just was simply going to work for them. There is another point to note that you also do need to issue K1s for every single quarter. And so it does proliferate into quite a large number of K1s. Most larger LPs can handle that. But for some individuals or maybe smaller fund of funds, that can feel like a little bit of overhead. So there may be a solution for that in the future, but today it does feel a little bit excessive to have that many K1s over time. So for me, a rolling fund was perfect for 5 or 6 quarters as a chance to prove out my strategy and my concept. And then ultimately I decided to switch over to the traditional fund structure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The tax burden of 15, 16, 20 K1 adds up really quickly. So you were the LP on the other side of dozens of solo GPs and micro funds at BCV, and you talked about this a little bit at the start. How did the experience of watching these solo GPs operate sort of shape what you were looking for in a fund administrator when you went out on your own?
Yeah, I've personally invested in funds for almost 10 years now. So I have probably seen every single back office fund administrator and logged into all of the portals. For me, it was a no-brainer. It was very clear to me that I would work with AngelList. I felt like by far has invested the most in robust software, both for the GP and the LP side. So everything from having real-time visibility into your SOI at every given moment, being able to easily issue capital calls to your investors. And probably for me, the biggest part of the LP experience where you interact with the fund administrator, frankly, is in the subscription process. And I have just been baffled by how many fund admins still send often something by DocuSign where it isn't even formatted correctly. It takes half hour to an hour or more to subscribe. Whereas as an LP on AngelList, once you know my entity and you know my selections, like I shouldn't have to re-enter all of that information every single time I subscribe to a new fund. And so AngelList just really streamlines the process for LPs to make it really easy for them to subscribe and to have full visibility to all the documentation, the LPA, everything else. So I really wanted a really, really delightful and seamless LP experience, especially on the subscription side and on the tax side. And that for me was very clearly, obviously, on AngelList.
Awesome. Definitely. I know our team is always really happy to hear when it's a seamless process. So happy to share that with our investor management team. I'm sure they're aware as well.
Actually, one other thing I'd mention too on the GP side is actually making investments. I think people may not realize how easy it is when I make an investment, there is a very clear form that I fill out on AngelList with sort of minimum information about the company name, the structure, the founder names, and the terms of the deal, and a little bit of information about the company. But all told, it probably takes me 5 minutes to fill it out. And then it generates a kickoff email with the founding team to get to closing. They review the documents. The team, there's a number of people, you and many others, who review this. And so the response time is incredibly fast, day or night, even sometimes holidays and weekends. Like it feels like it's just something I never have to think about. I know that part is always going to be very, very quick and smooth, which means a lot when you're working with founders who are trying to close a round very quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's something that we work really hard to deliver, is that like true seamless end-to-end experience. So obviously, like we never want to be a blocker to getting capital out the door into the company. So I think it's something we've spent a lot of time investing to make, just as hands-off, as easy as possible. So I'm glad that's your experience. So you closed a $16 million Fund 1 with institutional LPs like Pear VC, Ulu Ventures, and Verdis. Those investors have sophisticated requirements, like you said, audited financials, tailored LPAs, side letters, white glove LP relations. How did having AngelList behind you help you show up credibly to that caliber of investors in your Fund 1?
Yeah, I think probably the thing that stands out the most to me is the support I got on operational due diligence. So a few of my LPs had, pretty lengthy questionnaires around operational due diligence, and the team at AngelList was very happy to jump on a call for an hour or so with me and the LPs. And I think what's really great and hard to, estimate when you're first launching a fund is that when you go with a provider like AngelList, they often have already interacted with any LP you might be raising money from. And so the conversation isn't net new. They already have an understanding of, oh, this LP really cares about this, or they have a preference for this, and this is how we handle this kind of situation. And so, I went into operational due diligence, frankly, reading all the questions. I knew many of the answers, maybe not all of the answers. And anything that I wasn't sure of, AngelList 100% had covered. And I just felt like I was in great hands in those phone calls. And I felt really proud too. It just shows that, I've selected a great vendor that's going to give us great support and make sure that we have full compliance and security and everything else that an LP might be concerned about without it taking a lot of my time. So that was probably one of the biggest areas that there was a lot of support. Especially also, I'd say, with international LPs, sometimes there's challenges with bank verification or other things that they might need as they're signing your sub docs, and AngelList definitely rolled up their sleeves and helped get those folks what they needed and get them over the line, even if it required, some extra steps or extra works and coming up with creative solutions to make that happen. So I think all of those things were great. I also happened to work with an excellent lawyer, Scott Kitchens at Cole Freeman and Mallon, and he has worked with other funds on AngelList. And so I'm self-directed. I have my own LPA, but we had a good awareness then as a result of like what AngelList platform can support, and made sure we tailored everything to.
And now, back to the show.
We'd be remiss if we didn't actually share kind of our experiences with all of this, of like, how do we determine our workflows? What are some of the mistakes we've made? What tools are we using today? And kind of where we see it going. If you want to go first.
So we're a very small team. So in total in our firm, we have 5 investors plus an EIR, and then we have Madison, who does all operations, non-investment for us. But I think part of it is like, I always think about what I tell our portfolio companies. Your only advantage at your size is your ability to be agile, flexible, move fast. And I believe the same as a firm that is investing out of a $55 million fund.
Yeah.
And so one of our values, we didn't document our values till about 8 years in, because we're such a small team. It was largely the founders operating. And so when we made them explicit, the one thing my partner John pushed was, he goes, we're actually a lot more creative than we think, and that's given us a lot of freedom and ability to win. So creativity is something that we really cherish and we promote and we encourage. But a statement to that is, anyone at Dynamo is allowed to bring a tool, put it on the table that they're playing with, and try to convince someone else to also adopt.
I love that.
And there's a general open-mindedness as to, I'm going to try it, I'm not committing to it. And if I don't think it's going to work, I'm like, no harm, no foul, I'm just not going to use it. And so right now we are in a world where our core AI harness is actually a startup out of Europe called Victor, Viktor. And prior to that, we're actually building a homegrown agent off the back of LangChain. But we actually found it much easier to get to the productive bits and the interesting bits by using a pre-built harness with all the integrations. My partner, John, also uses Amy VC on the side for some more like venture-specific items. And also he likes some of the UX there. So right now, I think by and large, we're in an era of experimentation, learning quickly, changing quickly, fast I/O loops. Now, about 3 weeks ago, Claude came out and basically has said, we're introducing Claude Tag. It'll do the work for you. You can speak to it like a coworker. And actually, in the next couple weeks, as it goes to general release, we're going to re-platform Dynamo to Claude Tag. And the big question is, like, as we do this, yet we're looking at investments that might be specialty harnesses or agentic frameworks for different industries. How do we reconcile this? That's like a really challenging thing that I don't have the answer to, frankly. But where I'm trending to is if it has to do with general white collar work, writing documents, doing analysis of that ilk, building presentations, I think a Claude OpenAI is you're always gonna have that base. And over time, you're gonna have like maybe the Amy or something homegrown. And it's gonna probably reflect this growing belief that we're gonna be a multi-model world.
Absolutely.
And so equally, I think you'll have different harnesses effectively for different parts of your workflow as you really dig in and embed into your industry. Attio is our CRM, and I think it's been great because it's super extensible and integratable, similar to Granola.
I love that. A couple of things from how you're approaching it, I think is important for any firm builder to have is like embracing a culture of being curious and bringing in new things. And there's been so many questions of like, where does labor go? Like, there's this huge tension of like AI is going to take away a lot of jobs, right? And then people counter to that of like, no, if you look at all these different technological shifts, it's always created way more jobs than it did. Maybe, but it doesn't take away the tension that people had with like, hey, they've invested their careers, invested their skill sets, and it might just be wiped away. And so people ask, like, what should someone middle-aged do? What should people out of college do? And I think, it comes down to self-awareness of their things we've already been talking about, but self-awareness of their skill set and expertise and their superpowers. And willingness to bring in new things. And so younger people should bring in, and people who are not so young should be able to bring in new tools and be able to have that ability to show, hey, this is how it's worked for me. Here's the ROI. And this is why I think we should implement it as an organization. So that's a huge skill set. And I think something that all founders, all firm builders should be looking for in talent. The other piece is like you all being able to rapidly prioritize what is important. And so the example of like, hey, this is what we're going to report to our LPs and work on. This is more important, it's fully baked out, but keep working on it. You have to have a mind for rapidly prioritizing things.
Yeah.
And having a overall, like you're adaptive and flexible. But I think the best investors, a friend and I were talking about this, the best investors in our industry have a worldview, and they believe their investments are pushing towards that worldview. And so having a worldview of how your fund should work, what the culture should be, what tools should be utilized is all a part of that.
So we have an adage at Dynamo as investors, we're not here to not have opinions.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to have an opinion, you have to share it. Now, sometimes you like run into some gnarly personalities in the world of venture, almost like the sound of their own voice. But there's something new that like having a worldview is like having an opinion. And one thing you likely know is like, I hate someone who doesn't have an opinion. Like if you don't have a spine, you're not going to stand for something similar to like not having ambition. Like, it's probably going to wear out me. I'm not going to want to spend too much time with you.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like this is moving quickly.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to move quickly with it. And if you don't, there's going to be a finite life for the organization you're either charged with building or you're part of building.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
I will do real quick on kind of my journey of this. And so, as you know, doing SPVs, working with clients who are either emerging managers who are becoming more institutional or LPs or large corporates, I'm getting to test out a lot of different things in a lot of different scenarios for different stakeholders. And so I have my worldview is that you should be like that example for the kind of like grandmaster in chess. You should be able to use a machine and become a centaur, right? And this idea of literally blowing out the Dunbar's number should be, if you're an intentional, very connected person, you should be able to blow past that 140 number. And so I've always been focused. This is why I've in my prior life, wanted to create essentially a agentic CRM. I've always been looking for the best CRMs. And now with like where agentic AI is, Gen AI is, there's a belief, okay, I should be able to be way more intentional and utilize my great memory, but also have a backup brain. And so I've always just been focusing on that because that's my strength and that's what gives me energy. And so the first journey about 2 years ago, for some reason, was just using a lot of fucking money on Replit and just trying to create this like cerebro of
Been
like,
there.
and just like, yo, this is cool. And my family's like, my wife was like, what are you doing?
What is this thing that you just
bill,
blew $5,000 on over a weekend?
That you're not even using. It's just like, oh, well, it's cool. Vibe coding, just vibes. Then moving on to, all right, using, a premium version of chat, but still kind of using kind of as a chat bot and asking questions. It's like, how do I automate more? And then as, Cowork and Codex come out, realizing, oh, I can actually build these workflows. But I still had a mentality of like, oh, I'm going to really be prescriptive, assume, for a workflow, this agent does this, then it moves over to this agent that does this. So essentially I would have like this to-do bot that I called an associate. And anything it couldn't do on its own, then it moved over to a partner bot. And then we would have like, discussions and help it like, okay, this is what you need to do for this project. Here's my expertise. And I was getting some pretty good, productivity from
Probably
that.
better than 95% of people out there already.
Yeah. But it can get very, as you have your MCPs and all your data, and it can, I had to get a second computer, or I had an old computer that I was like, I'm just going to have this on doing that. It could go a lot slower, right? And you can have some mistakes. And so I think one thing that's also key is not being afraid to ask questions. So there's a founder based in San Francisco, Gen Z founder, really focused on how do we not think about kind of this human to agent AI loop, machine loop, but actually have it separated where they're actually their own employees. Mm-hmm. You do your work, they do theirs. And actually he even blowing it out to like, they run the whole departments. And he was telling me this story about how he helped his girlfriend with her law school exam and helped her do it in like 30 minutes instead of her doing it in like really
3
slowly.
hours.
Like exactly, like putting it in and then ask for the answer and all that. And so I was like, hey man, I need to redo my workflows. And so he goes through his path and I show him like, partner bot and re-engagement bot and associate bot. And he was like, I just want to, before I get into my feedback, he's like, how technical are you? And I'm like, I'm not that technical at all. And he's like, well, let me gauge. He's like, do you know what a systems prompt is? I was like, I know what a prompt is, but I don't know if I know what a systems prompt. He's like, do you know what a context window is? And I was like, no, I'm sorry, I don't. And then he was like, do you know what tokens are? And I was like, yeah, know those. And he was like, oh, okay. So if it's not in headlines, you don't know what it is. All right, cool.
Oh, wow. He called a VC a VC.
And I was like, fair. All right, cool. But dude, so nice, walk me through, and I'll probably write about this at some point, but like how to actually leverage these models where you should be using each now. And this is what I do now is like, what is the entire workflow for one thing? So it's like, if it's like, having the first pass of draft of emails, it takes the whole thing of that.
Up
right?
to the idea to the draft of the email in your inbox.
Exactly. Or if it's some workflow around, hey, prep for, you're going to have a guest on a podcast. It does the entire thing. It doesn't give off to other people or all the to-dos that come from your AI notes with Granola or Fathom. And then set it up as those agents never do the work, because we've all been through this example of like, damn, it's getting slower as I tell it more because it can't remember a lot of things. Context window. Learning. The more you know. But saying that those should now be managers essentially, and they're designating to all these sub agents every time. So now they can do a ton of sub agents at the same time, and now your work can be thorough and complex. And so even that process is like, all right, I need to be able to be fine with redoing everything. That my approach, which I thought made sense in my head, but because of the technology, actually didn't fit.
And you might need to redo it 2 or 3
Yeah,
times
exactly.
till like
It might
you're
not be
like
the
this is
right
good for a
workforce.
couple of years.
Exactly. Yeah.
The one thing I remind people is a lot of how you get AI performant is not different than when you have new hires coming in. You need to document how work is done. You don't kind of compartmentalize it. You basically go, hey, like we're doing diligence, or you're drafting cold outbound to companies. This is how you do it from like 0 to actually hitting the send button.
Yeah.
And that's not dissimilar, where I think a lot of work that for those who have actually documented key processes for training, a lot of that work actually is relevant if you're trying to just get your AI going to like a version 0, where like you can ask to do something and it comes back and it's like remotely what you want. And what we actually did was we took some of those documents and artifacts we had, but I used it as an excuse to go revisit them and improve them. Because some of them had been around for 12, some 24 months without being, touched. And then with AI, I was like, oh, we don't need to do this. This is a function of a human being there.
Yeah.
Or we can actually do that better because AI can take all the information in the world. We only focus on these things because a human only has so much head space.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's fascinating, and I'm excited to see what people discover.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about there's going to be discovery. It's going to feel like a novelty for the first 2 quarters, and then next thing you know, as soon as it's shared, every other firm is going to start, provided they agree that it's valuable, are going to adopt it.
It's why I think, leave us on this note, it's why I think the IC, individual contributor, is dead forever. Because even if you are working just with, you're going to be managing agents.